everyone. Thank you for tuning in again. I am Katie Batesman, the Content Director at She Can Code, and today we are discussing why we need to lift as we climb. Now, there are lots of women in tech initiatives nowadays, networking groups, women events and awards, all trying to address the lack of women in tech. But why should we care? And what can women do to champion each other? Now, we've got the wonderful Mary Shea, Global Innovation Evangelist at Outreach with us today to help us answer that question. Welcome, Mary.
Hey, Kaylee. It's great to be here.
Thank you. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Can we start with a little bit of background about yourself, please?
Sure. Happy to provide that for your audience. So as you mentioned, my name is Mary Shea, and I'm the Global Innovation Evangelist at Outreach. And that's sort of a very complex way of saying I'm an analyst. So I'm a technology analyst. I follow sales tech. I follow the future of buying and selling in the business world. And I spend a lot of time looking at diversity, equity, inclusion, both within tech, within sales, and writ large. And so that's what I do day to day. I conduct a lot of research, qualitative interviews like we're doing today, quantitative surveys, which we'll talk about. I've got a lot of data. Prior to joining Outreach, I was an analyst at Forrester Research, which is an independent market research company out of Cambridge, Massachusetts, in the States here. And loved that job, did very similar things, and have also been in sales for much of my career. So for 15, 20 years in sales, I was a chief revenue officer. I was an SDR, which is sort of an entry-level sales position, and just about everything in between. My horoscope is Gemini. I'm curious, and I just love intellectual challenges.
So when you started in sales, did you start in tech and fall into tech sales, or was that a plan of yours? Were you good at sales?
Well, it's funny because most people who go into sales in the business world, it wasn't a plan. You find that if you talk to a lot of people, it was very serendipitous. And so my first career, which I probably should have let you know, was as a classical musician, and I was an oboist.
Oh.
And so I played all over the world, and I also have a PhD in musicology and ethnomusicology. I was teaching at a small women's college in Boston at the time, and I didn't make very much money, so I sold cars in the summer. I ended up selling 3 or 4 cars to people who worked at Forrester Research, which was, as I mentioned, a technology market research firm. And they recruited me to come join, and I took a chance. I took a flyer on a company that was helping businesses understand what the impact of the internet was going to be back in that day. So it wasn't pure tech, but we focused on technology research. And then from there, I spent my selling leadership roles in primarily tech and SaaS-based companies.
Oh, wow, that's incredibly interesting. And as we go through this conversation as well, you must have quite an interesting insight. I've always found at companies that I've worked at, sales team have been quite male-dominated teams as well. So it would be really interesting to hear your spin on working in sales and in tech. Firstly, though, we would like to kick off with our first question today. Why do you think businesses should care about diversity within their workforce?
Well, in and above, it's the right thing to care about and think about and pay attention to. It's no surprise that diverse organizations, whether they're sales, engineering, research, or what have you, deliver better business results. They deliver better business outcomes. And there's numerous studies from LinkedIn to McKinsey to Forrester to Outreach that I've led that shows that diverse organizations deliver better growth and more profitability. And then specifically in sales, women in sales, and we've seen so many articles come out from HBR and others that show that women at the individual contributor level, as well as in management and leadership, typically deliver on their quotas more than their male counterparts. So, look, the numbers and the data are there. But I do want to circle back to my first comment, which is it's the right thing to do, right? Women make up more than half of the global workforce. So, they should be in leadership, tech, and all kinds of roles across the board.
Yeah, that's so right. Actually, when you say, especially sales teams and women being top of their game, I worked at a company where it was a male-dominated sales team. There was one female, and she was always top of the leaderboard, and she always done just amazing. And all of the boys could never reach her. But she had such a way about her that you're absolutely right. That when there is a female on the team, especially in sales, they tend to always outdo their colleagues. So is that your experience as well, actually, coming from a sales background? Is that something you've seen?
Yeah, so I mean, certainly I've seen that B2B sales organizations have been pretty homogeneous, as you mentioned, typically, white male dominated, and we could even get into an age bracket as well. And I've certainly seen that across the board. I think it's only recently now that companies are really starting to look into the research and do the data that shows the business results from women tend to pretty consistently outperform males. So, when I was selling, yes, it was fairly male dominated across the board. And when I was a chief revenue officer, when I was in sales leadership roles, it was probably 15 years ago, 10 years ago, it was almost unheard of that you would find women hitting that top echelon of sales leadership, whether that's because of implicit or explicit bias or because of a range of other reasons. It's a tough role, probably one of the toughest roles in the organization. There's constant travel. There's always somebody that's looking out to get your job. The longevity for all genders is somewhere in the range of 18 months. So it was, when I was doing that job, it was really, really tough. And when I talk to other women who've been around a while, like I have, you find that there's this double bind dilemma where women leaders get judged by different standards than men, whether that's in sales or across different areas of the functional areas of the business. And so I talked to a lot of leaders who said, I was told by my CEO, I'm not tough enough, I'm not strong enough. Or if you are, then there's another word that we can all find for you. So it's certainly been really challenging. But what I'm super excited about now is that we're seeing a lot more women in sales leadership. We're seeing them succeed. And we're also seeing them reach back and provide that helping hand and mentorship to that next gen. And that's what I'm super excited. You see organizations like Chief coming up and the RISE program that we have at Outreach, which I'll hopefully get a chance to tell you about a little bit later. But we're seeing sort of an openness to helping each other, and even with male allies who are sponsors and mentors as well.
Yeah. And I think in sales as well, it's so black and white that, if you get told you're not hitting your number, you can really see whether or not somebody is doing well or not in sales. And as you mentioned, it can be a very tough sector for men and women as well in the workplace. So why is championing women in tech so important for the future success of the sector?
Well, I think it's really, really important. Number one, for some of the reasons that I've already discussed, but the research that I've conducted recently this summer and in October shows that business buyers actually want to buy from organizations that are representative of the world around them. So 74% of buyers agreed that they want sales teams to be more diverse. And so we're starting to see organizations that will walk away from partnering with a company that doesn't value diversity, that doesn't put forth a team that looks and acts and has diversity of thought like their organization. And so eventually, if companies don't embrace diversity, they're going to start losing business. And I post on LinkedIn quite frequently, so hope some of your listeners will follow me. But I posted about this the other day, and I had a number of people come back to me and say, we're already seeing companies lose business for not paying attention to and committing to diversity across the board. And that's just not in gender. That's really even more broadly.
Yeah, I think it's interesting there you mentioned about the sales team reflecting what you're selling as well, because I remember working at a company where we launched a Women in Tech Awards, and I remember the sales team, they were all guys and they didn't know how to sell it, which I found so surprising at the time. But the reason why they felt they couldn't relate was they were all male, and they didn't quite, this was 13 years ago, and I think back in the day people were talking about it, but perhaps that conversation wasn't there as it is now. We still have a long way to go, but 13 years ago, I think our sales team really struggled to understand why we wanted to launch an awards to showcase the women working in the tech sector. And so you're right, just having a diverse team that can really understand what it is that you're trying to sell is super helpful, because I ended up having to sell it, and I'm not a salesperson, but so we could still push ahead with what we wanted to do. But why do you think what is putting women off from the sector? Is it that you mentioned a few things about what it's like to work on a sales team, for instance? Are there other things about working in technology that you've noticed during your career?
Yeah, certainly, I can speak from both experience as well as from the research that I conduct on a pretty regular basis. One thing that's really interesting in my recent research, and then I'll talk about my own experiences, is that women's satisfaction with the company that they work at is about 9% less than male counterparts, and the same relative split on their satisfaction with their managers. So what that tells me is that leadership, management, and overall company cultures haven't really cracked the code on how to enlist and engage, inspire women across the board in the organization. So like you said, there's a lot more work that needs to be done. And there's so many books out there. There's a really interesting book that was written by Eva Helen, and it's called Women in Tech, a book for guys. And it's really interesting because a lot of times we see some of the books are written for women or underrepresented folks in the corporate world. And she actually wrote this for men. She picks out 5 different types of personas and really shows where these men are missing the mark in terms of how they're interacting with women in the workforce. So, there's lots of really interesting things that folks can do to learn. But to answer your question more specifically, I think women have historically stayed away from STEM jobs. I think that, it's difficult. You don't always want to be a trailblazer. And, if you're only 1 or 2 of you at a company, it can be really, really difficult. As I mentioned as well, bosses don't necessarily have the leadership chops to engage in ways that are going to be hyper motivating. I think in the UK, women just account for about 17% of tech jobs. So that's super, super low. Things that put women off start before they even join the organization. They can start with once you start researching the company and you start at the board level and you see a very homogeneous board made up of a bunch of guys. Then you go one step down to the executive team and the representation isn't there as well. I tell women that I coach and work with and advise, do your research. And if you don't see a commitment at the highest echelons of the organization, it's probably not going to be a comfortable place to work because the tone does get set at the top. The next thing that I see that puts women off is the way job descriptions are constructed, whether the language is super male dominated. I think in the world of sales, instead of saying we're looking for an expert seller who can create and close pipeline, they'll say we're looking for a hunter, a closer, a killer, a quota crusher. Well, maybe that doesn't really appeal to me. Maybe that's not who I am. In B2B sales, we'll say we need 10 years of SaaS experience. Well, a lot of women sellers who are phenomenal have come up not through tech or not selling SaaS. So without even realizing it, you can put off women from even wanting to apply to your company.
Yes, yeah. And as mentioned there, you mentioned so many areas of the business as well. I think that making change, it's definitely a company-wide commitment. As you mentioned, it's not just from leadership, it's from your colleagues around you, it's from yourself as well, and what you want to do and the direction that you would like to go in. What are small steps that individuals can take to champion women in tech?
I think there's a lot of steps. First and foremost, I think you want to take a hard look at your role descriptions and the language that you use and the language that you use on your website. I think you can be more creative in creating a more expansive job descriptions so that people will actually apply for roles. You probably know this, but men will apply for a role or promotion if they have 40 to 60% of what's being asked. Women will apply if they have 90 to 100% that's asked. So providing some more expansiveness there. The other thing is I find that with diversity, the word intentionality goes with it really closely, right? It doesn't happen by the by. So you can provide interview loops that have representation across gender, race, how you identify, what have you, making sure that people feel comfortable when they're interviewing. You can also have a world in your workforce where mentorship is encouraged and expected, right? And not just women mentoring women, but because women who are going to go up the organization at any tech or other company, the decision's typically going to be made by men. So you need men who are mentors and allies as well. And I encourage women to seek those out. And then I think the other thing you can do is have policies that are gender friendly or parent friendly or friendly to people who are somewhat underrepresented in the world more largely. So paternity and mat leave, pay policies. LinkedIn's a great example. They realized that they were losing a lot of women that were on maternity leave in their selling organization, and they didn't know why. So they did some research and they found out that their compensation plan for when folks are on leave was really punishing. And because their sales cycles in some cases were very long, these women, because they weren't full-time employees, weren't getting their commission. So now they're double paying. They're giving commission to the people who are taking over the op, as well as the women who started it out, or the person rather, because it goes across all types of people. And they're getting their full commission without getting punished. So looking at policies, compensation, pay transparency, and then finally, I would say, if you don't have an employee resource group or a culture that encourages that, let those groups happen organically because they provide a safe space for different types of diverse employees to come together, talk about some of the challenges, talk about the microaggressions that they experience on a regular basis. And even have the ability to come together socially. And then finally, this is controversial because I know CEOs like to be in control and they like to see their beautiful offices filled with people. But having flexible and remote policies actually provide an environment where underrepresented folks can take a break from the continuous microaggression that they feel in the workforce. And so, believe it or not, remote environments can help as well. So those are quite a few things that companies can do right at the get-go.
And I think a lot of the things that you mentioned there are really about showing compassion as a leader as well, and remembering to do that. I think good managers, they know about their direct team, they know about their personal lives, and they know what matters there. And you mentioned in the example there of just noticing that people would disappear once they've been on maternity or paternity leave, and just recognizing that there was a problem, and showing that compassion. And I think that goes further as well, and not just to people that are parents, but people that are caring for somebody or who need to disappear. I worked at a wonderful advertising agency. I had a parent that I was caring for at the time, and whenever obviously you're caring for somebody and they're terminally ill, things change, treatment changes, operations happen, and you have to disappear sometimes. And I was never questioned. I had a great manager who's very compassionate, and I think that helps you. A lot of that changed as well with COVID and flexible working.
Right.
and that helps a lot of women, obviously, along the way if you're trying to juggle family obligations. A lot of things are not necessarily questioned now than they would have before. But we talk a lot about we're talking about women in leadership positions. How can junior women help others?
Well, that's a great question. I think the first thing you can do is start by helping yourself, because if you really invest in your career, and I invested in my career, I started in the business world very late, and I knew that if I was going to catch up, I had to have a very fast career trajectory, and I did. So by helping yourself, invest in a career coach, invest in executive coaching, join external organizations, start an internal organization at your own organization. We have Outreach Women's Network. So this is a place where the women can come together at Outreach across a range of different job functions. And so there's things you can do there. The other thing you can do is, try to coach and mentor and encourage as many people as you can in your organization, and speak up.
It's interesting there that you mentioned starting with yourself, because I think that's something that, if you attend a lot of women in tech groups, you hear about, the things that you should be doing to help other people, which is absolutely admirable, to help other people and to make sure that, as we were talking about today, that you lift as you climb. But starting with yourself, as they say, you need to put on your own oxygen mask before you can help others, to make sure that you don't burn out as well, and that you look after yourself in your own career as you grow. Can you tell us a little bit about Rise and the Rise Up programs, and how do these frameworks help grow diverse talent?
Well, thank you so much for asking. We're really proud of both of those programs at Outreach. And Rise started at the beginning of 2022. And the program was led by our head of sales and our head of HR. And it came about because our head of sales at that time was a woman. And interestingly enough, all of her direct reports who had operational responsibility for quota, the money, P&L, were all men. And every time a senior level VP role opened up, she tried to hire a woman. She even went out and hired expensive headhunters and search firms and spent all the money. And at the end of the day, couldn't get the candidate she wanted. So she and the head of HR decided to create an internal program that would cultivate that next generation and few generations of female talent within the selling organization. And one of the things I loved about it was the concept was, we want women to rise up. And if they rise up and such that there isn't a role at Outreach, but they go someplace else, we're going to still see that as a success, because we know they'll reach back. And so we created this program that provided experience, access, projects for a set select of up and coming female leaders. And it was a tremendous success. It was such a success that we decided to launch Rise Up, which is for a set select of Black employees across all of Outreach, and providing the education, executive coaching. We partner with a well-known executive coaching external firm. But the biggest thing we found was just access to working with business leaders outside of your functional group and being put on these big, hairy, audacious challenges, and then being able to come back and provide solutions back to the business and the C-suite. And so we're super excited about both of those programs, and we are sharing the playbooks and the frameworks with any company out there in the world that would like to learn from what we did and make a program of their own. But I think once you get more underrepresented folks in leadership roles, then you're going to find they're going to reach back with a mentorship, and they're going to hire with that intentionality that I spoke about being missing a little bit earlier in the conversation.
It's so interesting when you mentioned there as well, even if you don't stay with us, just making sure that you support women through the ranks, because if somebody circles back to companies later in their career as well. You know, it helps everybody throughout the tech sector anyway. And you mentioned there a little bit about sharing the rule book and helping other businesses. How can other businesses develop and implement their own programs to promote diversity and equality?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing you might want to do is just start out with a little research and find out the companies who are getting the awards and getting the recognition and being on shows like yours, who actually are getting, and I want to say some of it right, because none of us get it all right, right? It's a
Yes.
constant journey of education. So seek out and understand who those companies are and who's those business leaders are. The next step is just talk to them, talk to everyone you can and learn as much. Like I said, someone reaches out to me, we will share the whole playbook of the program. And then of course you have to make it your own. There's other things out there too. There's thought leaders and influencers who are lifting up women across the workforce. So you can follow them on social media. You can reach out to me and ask me who they are. People like Lori Richardson and Janice Gordon over in the UK and many, many others. And you can develop relationships with them and learn from them, bring them in to speak. Bring them into your organization to consult. There are a range of people who are out there who are helping businesses be more effective in driving diversity through formal and informal programs.
That's great advice for businesses, especially if businesses don't know where to start. And we always say to people that we work with, you know, we really don't care where you are in your diversity journey. We're there to, you know, help you right from the start. You know, even if you already have a very in-depth program implemented. You mentioned a little bit earlier about male allies. What more can men do? How can they be better allies?
Yeah, I think, you know, I think it's being, first of all, having an open heart and mind, right? And understanding the data, understanding my team is going to be more successful. Our company is going to be more successful if we have a range of diverse talent on that team. And then open yourself to the education. I have been educating myself a lot lately on, you know, what can women in the workforce do to be a good ally for Black women in the workforce. And that's something that I need to educate myself more on. So start reading. There's a lot of books out there that you can read. Um, and then I think really putting an effort into sincerely celebrating the accomplishments of women and diverse folks in your organization. So again, whether that's external awards or internal awards or just simply communication and recognition, I think that's something that you could really do. Being a mentor and a sponsor, those are things that we talked about. And then there was kind of one thing I didn't really talk about, and it's on the education side, but you know, I would bring in some external training, and it can all be done online with modules that help you understand unconscious bias. What is a microaggression? Like, you need to learn those things and probably year after year go through those modules and make sure you haven't taken a step back. So those are some of the things you can do. And then bring in some of these women like Eva Helen, who wrote this book, and be a speaker at your organization at your next offsite.
Yeah, because once companies understand, or even if the mirror has been held up to them or people within their company, I think things start to change. As long as people know, as you say, you know, introducing training about unconscious bias, for instance, people might not realise until they're shown. We are running out of time already, but I would love to ask you about role models, because we're firm believers in that you can't be what you can't see. So who are your female role models in tech?
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, first of all, Anna Baird. So she is currently doing a lot of board work, but she has an incredible career behind her. And she actually launched the RISE program for outreach. So she's out there. She's very accessible on LinkedIn, and she's an advisor to a range of different companies. She's just a wonderful person. Andrea Austin is someone I admire tremendously. So she runs a sales business unit at Google. She coined a phrase that I used in my research. If you don't like the channel, change it. If you keep getting the wrong information, you're not getting treated right, go somewhere else. this is a tremendous time for women in sales leadership. People want to hire you, and women in tech leadership and women in tech across the board. So I'm a big admirer of Andrea. Tracy Eiler, who many know from her years as being a top CMO. Those are some of the three that I love. I could go on and on, but thank you for asking that question.
Yeah, I love that expression. If you don't like the channel, change it. I think
I love it too.
That's amazing. I think I'm going to use that in a few internal meetings. I'm just going to throw that one out there.
Go for it. She would be really honored.
Yeah, it applies to so many things, and it's great advice. Mary, we are already out of time. It has flown by. So thank you so much for coming in and chatting with us today.
Well, it's truly my pleasure, Kaylee, and thank you for having me, and thank you for all the amazing work that you're doing on a regular basis. Appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And to everybody listening, as always, thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you again next time.